Two things that many Kenyans associate me with, among many, are that I have a photographic mind, and two, I am a linguistic. I think the two are related, but not necessarily conjoined twins. You can have a photographic mind without being a linguistic, and you can be a linguistic without having a photographic mind, but they are usually related. Many things people say that one inherits from the parents. In my case, it could be true because my dad spoke only 3 languages. I only heard him speak 3 languages. He died 9 months ago, so I'm yet to get used to calling him my late father. My father only spoke 3 languages: the English, Swahili, and our vernacular. I have an opinion that he was fluent in Kiganda. You know, he studied in Uganda. He was fluent in Kiganda, but for one reason or another, he never liked talking Kiganda. One could talk to my father in Kiganda, and my father would answer in a language, either English or Kiswahili, but he really understood the whole language. My mom, who died a long time ago, she knew so many languages. In fact, if you asked her how many languages she knew, she would need a pen and a paper to start writing down. My mother had a unique talent as far as language is concerned. She could spend a place, let's say you drop her in the middle of a certain tribe. Believe it or not, my mother would take 2 weeks, or 2 months. My mother would take 2 months, not 2 weeks, to learn that language. And in those 2 months, she would learn the language to pronounce so well that you'd even think that she's been speaking that language for 2 decades. But for a funny thing is that my mother spoke my language, but anybody who met her for the first time would obviously believe that this is a Kikuyu who has learned Luhia. I don't know why. Every language she spoke fluently, but she always spoke Luhia with a heavy Kikuyu accent. She never spoke any other language with any other accent. Of course, her English and Swahili, you'd know that she's a Kikuyu. But any other language, be it Arabic, be it Indian, be it Luo, be it, mention it, she would speak very fluently. My father, I said he spoke only 3 languages: vernacular, English, and Kiswahili. He understood Kiganda. I do not know whether it was confidence matter or anything, but you talked to him in Kiganda, he would answer you in English or Swahili. But my father had a good working understanding of Maasai and Kisomali. To some extent, when you could speak to him in Kisomali or Kimaasai, and he would answer you. It was a relatively good language. For you to be called a linguistic, you have to have a power to retain the language, especially if you move out of the place where that language is spoken. A good example is Raphael Morioki Getonga. Raphael Morioki Getonga's mother is my mother's eldest sibling. When we were in Mandera with Raphael Morioki Getonga, my cousin brother, he spoke Amharic fluently, more than all Kenyans. But a few years ago, I think I spoke 5% of what he spoke. Now, when we met a few years ago, I retained my 3% of Amharic, but he dropped all the Amharic he knew. So for you to be a linguistic, you had to retain the language, especially when you moved out of the places or you stayed in a place where people don't speak that language. The power to retain the language was paramount. My mother had a photographic mind. Now here is an interesting thing, because my mother, you needed only to remind her of something and she would talk of it as if it happened yesterday. That is also where I think I inherited a lot, because I remember when people say you remember everything to the greatest detail, this is what happened. It is you who provoke me to. Like, you remind me of something, then I start talking to myself. In the TJRC and in Ouko Commission, I was being interviewed by 3 people, one a lawyer, one a journalist, and one a human rights activist. A cameraman would set the camera and leave us and go back. So we would start talking. And you find that there are occasions they would just provoke something in my memory and I would start talking. And some of the things I used to say, they would go and visit the scene. Of course, with so many years, there is a lot of changes. New building coming up, forests no longer there. But they would ask me if I had notes which I used to keep, but I would say it is only that when I started talking to myself is when I go back to that time. If you check KTN News, Untold Story about Frederick Simiyu Masinde. Frederick Simiyu Masinde is the person who changed the Kenyan constitution, where today, if a candidate dies before the election day, the election is called off. He is the first and the only posthumous MP, where in the morning when people started voting, he was alive. When the elections were being counted, he was dead. When KTN was asking me, I supplied the number plates of a vehicle 30 years after the event. And when they checked with the National Assembly Hansard, they found that when I said 326, the number was 392. I said 326, they found that the number plate was 392. So that is how my mind works, and it came from my mother, because she would talk of something, and she could, when telling you of something, she could tell you as if she's watching a movie and telling you how it is going on. She could give you, and it is because of her. My father was also some linguistic to some extent, but mostly my mother, that I speak 9 Kenyan languages: Turkana, Pokot, Luhya, Kisii, Maasai, Kamba, Kikuyu, Meru, and Somali. I think those are 9. It is because of that. And the best thing, as I said before, is the retention of the information that you have to, when you move to a place where that language is not spoken, you still retain it. As I counted 9 languages in Kenya, I also speak Kirwanda and Kirundi, but I'm very fluent in Lingala. Ngai naloba Kilingala malamu kaka bango. That is, and photographic mind is when someone is asking me a question, I find that I'm talking, and it is like I am not there. It's as if I'm talking to myself, and that is where some Christians, watumishi, they can use that and start conning people money as Bwana ameniambia. But you see, that is a talent that I discovered in my early 40s. It would have been better if I would have discovered it in my early 20s. But if you know anybody with a linguistic or photographic talent, kindly encourage that individual to do that, so that we utilize that. With that, my viewer, I have commented something small on my talent, both in linguistic and in photographic memory. My mother said she could remember everything and tell you as if she's watching a movie. But my father had a different photographic mind. Like one time, I told him about a muhindi in Kajiado. I was saying that the muhindi was called Nanu, and my father was telling me certain names, Manu Chantria, Patel, vitu kama hizo. I said, no, the man was called Nanu. And then my father got annoyed. He asked me when this Indian was there, how old were you? And I answered my father that I was 8 years old in standard 2. Then my father told me, and you know, I was the head of police in the whole district. Now you want to tell me that a standard 2 boy knows a lot of things in a district where the OCPD is wrong. But I still insisted. I told Dad that I was sure I was right. My father's photographic memory now went differently. If you provoke him that way, my father always slept with a stool and a notebook next to his bed. So right in the middle of the night, he would try to remember that time. And then when the idea comes, he would then write some small notes on his notebook, and the following day he would remember it. But if he doesn't write it on the notebook, he will forget it forever. So one day he was sleeping, and he switched on his mind to try and remember that time when he was in Kajiado as the county police boss. And when he remembered, then the following day he came with a notebook and told me, he congratulated me and told me that he will forever respect my photographic mind, because the Indian was called Patel Manusuryan, such funny name. But you see, Asians used to call him Manu. Manuscript, I don't know, I can't remember the name well, but it was Manu something. Manu Chantria or something like that. So Asians used to call him Manu, in short. And Maasais have a name called Nanu. In Kibukusu, Nanu means who. So when a Bukusu asks Nanu took this thing, they are asking who took these things. But in Kimasai, if you say Nanu took these things, he says I took those things. So in Kimasai, Nanu means me. And so Maasais could easily call him Nanu instead of Manu. So that is how his photographic mind used to be. You provoke him. My mother, you never needed to provoke my mother. It just came. Just mention something and it comes. But my father, you needed to provoke him. To me, I met somebody whom I met last in 1973. That is 50 years ago. I only see that person and then the pictures coming. But my father's photographic mind was, at night he would try. Actually, he would try himself to crack and whatever. And then when he sleeps, the whole answer comes, and he stretches his hand in the darkness with like a small torch, switches on the torch and writes a small note. So that without doing that in the morning, he'll forget. So that in the morning he comes and says, what is that? And so that is about my photographic mind and also my linguistic capabilities. Thank you.